Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle. A few days before Christmas, I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and I'm joined as I am every week by my co-host of the Libertarian Angle, Richard Ebeling, who is the BB&T Distinguished Professor of Ethics and Free Enterprise Leadership at the Citadel. Richard, welcome back, and Merry Christmas to you.
It's great to be here with you, our viewers and listeners. And let me also extend a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year's to all those who very kindly and generously spend a little time with us every week. And it is that time when we give gifts to friends, relatives, those we care about, just like government when it gives out free money to people, right, Jacob?
Well, that's what I thought we should talk about today. The federal government as Santa Claus. I mean, yes, this is the time that Santa Claus visits homes all across the world and brings some really cool things. And, well, that's what the federal government does, Richard. I mean, and the federal government does it all year long. And you can talk to progressives about this. You can talk to conservatives about it. I mean, they think it's fantastic because they've looked at the federal government as Santa Claus, gosh, at least for several decades, since like the 1930s or so. So why not devote the show to the federal government as Santa Claus? What do you think?
I think you're right. And in fact, this goes back further than that because I'm forgetting who the author is. Senility, I guess, is catching up. But there is a book from the 1920s, 1925, 1927, called Congress as Santa Claus. So even before Hoover and the New Deal of FDR, there was Congress as Santa Claus. So Santa's been hard at work in America, doing this for a long time through the avenues of government.
Yeah, I mean, and he's a good guy because I mean, like he'll give you stuff for free. I mean, you've got free housing, free retirement for seniors. I mean, think of all those big Social Security checks that are free, and Medicare, free health care. I mean, Santa's a great guy. Farm subsidies. I mean, the whole thing is just awesome. I'm really surprised that we don't give more credit where credit is due, and that this really is the supremo Santa Claus in the whole world, the federal government.
Absolutely. And it's seemingly all for free. It is all for free. We don't have to worry about these things. We don't worry about these things at all. Government just gives us money, in-kind services, all the things that we need in life at no cost to ourselves. And it's the benefits that we receive from those who we elect to office. Now, of course, the reality is, to use a phrase, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. Okay. Sorry.
Hey, was that Santa coming in and visiting us? Like a little elf, huh?
But the fact is that this is obviously all a fallacy. Politicians try to give the impression that they will do good for various groups and segments of the society without assigning a price tag to it. But the fact is, there's nothing that government can give to some that it doesn't have to take from others to do so. Government doesn't produce goods and services. Government doesn't manufacture and sell and earn money like other businesses or individuals do. Government has only one source of the money through which it redistributes goodies, is by taxing the productive members of the society to various degrees, and then taking that money and then using that money either to hand out money that others can then spend from the productive efforts of that first tax group, or for the government itself to spend that money to provide these in-kind services, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be public housing, whether it be the direct provision of Medicare and Medicaid services and so on. There is nothing that the government can give to some that it can't cannot do without first taking from others. Now, what has reinforced this, and this is a theme that we've occasionally talked about in the past, Jacob, is the power of government to create this illusion through deficit spending. In the 19th century, the U.S. operated with a fiscal constitution, an unwritten fiscal constitution. There's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that requires government to run a balanced budget. But that was the norm in general. But with the coming of the Great Depression, FDR, and then the reinforcement of Keynesian economics with this idea of spending to goose the economy, that balanced budget rule was broken. Now, under a balanced budget rule, government is still going to spend money. It might even spend money on things that you don't want or I don't want. But the ideal of the balanced budget rule was that it is clear and direct. If the government is going to spend $1 on X, Y, and Z, it must do so by taxing Bob and Sam and Bill. And then Bob, Sam, and Bill, the voter taxpayers, would have to decide whether they really thought that what government was offering to do was worth having that much of their money less in their pocket, because every dollar spent means a dollar tax. Now, again, government could spend on a lot of things that a classic liberal or a libertarian might not want, but it was clear and direct that government benefit, quote, involved a cost, less money in the producing pockets of the population. But with deficit spending, government can go now and say, politicians can go out and say, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you $100 worth of government spending goodies. And I'm going to either not tax you at all for the value of it, or I'm going to give you $100 worth of government goodies, and in taxes it's only going to cost you $50. Wouldn't you like to get $100 worth of goodies for only $50? And therefore creates the impression that government can create wealth and benefits out of thin air, like the magician pulling the rabbit out of the hat. And that is the danger, this break between what people spend and what things cost and where the money comes from in the private sector versus the government sector. If you go in the supermarket and you're thinking of buying, well, you know, what if I buy an extra box of breakfast cereal this week? All of us operate with budgets. We know that if I'm going to take an extra box of breakfast cereal off the shelf, then I'm going to have to buy some item less because my budget only goes so far. More on one thing involves me having to spend less on another. Government creates that illusion that it can play Santa Claus, either with tax dollars or with deficit spending and the accumulated debt that results, like the magician pulling the rabbit out of the hat, waving his magic wand, and creating the impression that government can give anything we want for all of us to enjoy life, seemingly without an expense on anyone. That is the delusion that has dominated thinking, not just in the United States, but around the world for far too long. And that is what is causing all of our fiscal and debt problems in the United States today.
Well, and not only is it destroying us financially, it's also destroying us spiritually and morally, because it creates that mindset, Richard, of, oh, thank you. Thank you, government, for being so good to me. Thank you, Santa Claus, for bringing me all these little goodies. When really, it's just your own money that the government's dealing with, or money that's been taken from your friends and neighbors, which really, in a moral sense, isn't much better. I mean, you can see it with this Trump tax reduction bill, where, he's lowering taxes and saying, see what a good person I am? See how good government is? It's reducing your taxes. And everybody's there, oh, thank you, Mr. Trump. Thank you for lowering my taxes. And totally ignoring that all he's doing is ignoring how much he's taking from you or how much he's letting you keep as an allowance, because that's what the whole income tax structure is based on. And then not only that, Richard, but as Milton Friedman pointed out long ago, the real burden of taxation is on the spending side. That you got to look at how much the government's spending, because even if it's taxing 20%, let's say the equivalent of $20 million, if it's spending $100 million, that $80 million still has to be collected one way or the other from the citizenry, either through borrowing, which they're going to have to repay with taxes or inflation, or just direct a tax raise. So this notion that Trump is using, oh, I'm lowering taxes for you, is nonsense, because they never talk about spending. Now, his one little notion is that a variation of what was called the Laffer curve a long time ago, where he says, oh, if I lower taxes, people will work harder, and there'll be growth, and therefore we don't need to cut spending. Well, that's nonsense. That principle might work if taxes are equal to spending and you lower both taxes and spending, and then people say, oh, well, now I've got an incentive to work harder. But at some point, you reach a point where that just doesn't work. So this notion that you can keep lowering taxes while government spending is soaring through the roof is just nonsense. There's going to be a crack up at some point in time, and they're already projecting that this is going to add another $10 trillion to the amount of the debt. They're at 20 trillion. So this whole bankrupt Santa Claus notion is not only destroying us financially, but it's also destroying us spiritually, in the sense that we now look to government for our benefits, for our largesse, for our retirement, for our health care, for our children's education. No nation can really be strong when you got people with that kind of mindset of dependency.
Yeah, you see an example of what you're saying, the way the government articulates it and people have come to think about it, is that a phrase has been heard during this entire debate about this tax bill going through Congress, and that is, how do we pay for the tax cut? You notice what's in play?
Yeah.
How do we pay for the tax cut? You see, this is all the government's money, and we're being kind enough to give some of the government's money to people through a tax cut. But then if we give away the government's money, how do we pay for it with guaranteeing all the level of spending that government is supposed to do? This is the entire game that's occurring with the tax bill right now. Now, from a free market perspective, it is wonderful that corporate taxes will go down from their current height to probably 21%, because then businesses producing goods and services can retain more of the profits they produced, either to replow into future investment or to pay to their stockholders, which is their return on their invested funds. And if there's some deregulation occurring, as Trump has marginally introduced in certain areas, government should be off people's hands. But notice that there is not the similar cut in taxes, in personal income taxes, down the income scale, the way there is on the side of business taxes. Now, the left wants to say, you see, this is just a tax cut for the rich, while the middle class isn't being helped. The real dilemma here is that there's not a comparable tax cut for the middle class. People being allowed to at least keep more of their own money, because both government and that middle class is unwilling to give up something that does cost money and prevents cuts in taxes because of the impossibility of cutting spending. And that is the belief in the entitlement welfare state. It's that mentality that I don't want to really pay for it, but I expect government to give me Social Security. I expect government to give me Medicare, Medicaid, subsidies for my business, whether it be solar panels or farm subsidies, as you mentioned, or government housing, or free food for certain segments of the society. As long as people believe that this is what government is to do, government is to be a Santa Claus for them, then the resources and the money to play Santa Claus has to come from somewhere. And that means that if government either taxes or borrows the money, and that, as you were saying, is the full burden of what government does. And this is the schizophrenia on the part of the American people. They want the goods and services, but they don't want to pay for it. That would be like me in the supermarket filling my cart up with all the goodies down the aisles, coming to the checkout counter and saying, this is what I want, but I don't want to pay for it. Or whatever total has been rung up on the register, I only want to pay 65%. That's the mentality. That people don't realize that the same rule that applies that when you go shopping on your private purchases is no true if government is going to hand out favors. The money and the resources have to come from somewhere, and there's no such thing as a free lunch. And that is the fundamental dilemma. A, what you expect from government, and B, the failure to ask, is that what government should be doing, and what is the alternative of human liberty?
Well, and we should keep in mind the international scope of the federal government as Santa Claus. That the real Santa Claus visits homes all across the world, Richard, as you know, on Christmas Eve. But the federal government as Santa Claus is not just limited to Americans. There's a lot of foreign dictators that absolutely love the federal government as Santa Claus, because they have their little stockings out all year long, and the federal government fills them up with millions of dollars of foreign aid, or foreign armaments, like the gifts come in the form of tanks and missiles and things that they can use to keep their tyrannical hold on power against their own citizens. I mean, like the Egyptian military dictatorship is a good example. That the Egyptian military government puts out its stockings all year long, and it's just filled by the federal government. It's their Santa Claus. So there's people around the world, namely dictators as well as other foreign regimes, that are very, very grateful that the Santa Claus comes and uses U.S. taxpayer money to fill their stockings and armaments. Let me put things in perspective in terms of a historical analysis. When America got started, there was no income tax. There was no welfare state, no Social Security, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no farm subsidies, no foreign aid to dictators. Everybody kept everything they earned. And this is what they decided for themselves what to do with it. There was essentially a separation of charity and the state, where everybody decides what to do with his own money, save it, donate it, or whatever. This is what Americans consider to be a free society. This is what sort of made America special as compared to the rest of the world. And so then things start to shift, though. The latter part of the 19th century, the progressives start promoting their socialist ideas. And so you get the income tax, which now totally inverts things, because now the government, before, people could keep everything they earned and there was nothing the government could do about it. Once the income tax was enacted, the federal government could say, now we're in the driver's seat. We decide how much you're going to be permitted to keep. And that's reflected in this Trump debate. Trump is saying, I think we should let you keep more of your money. And the progressives are saying, no, we think you should be able to keep less of your money. But lost in this whole debate is it's them deciding how much of our money we're going to be permitted to keep. And of course, the reason all this is necessary is to fund these massive coercive, mandatory charity programs where people no longer have a choice of like helping their parents. I mean, you got the choice, but on top of Social Security, which is a mandatory stealing plunder program. Nobody puts in their money, and it's not put into a retirement account. It's just spent. So now government takes money from one group of people, the young and the productive, and gives it to another group of people under a mandatory coercive charity program. And if you say, I'm not participating in this because this is a free country, the IRS will come and grab you, take your assets, and put you in jail. So you've got a totally different system, historically speaking, here in the United States. You got one system where people are free to keep everything they earn, decide what to do with it, and consider that to be the essence of freedom. You've got the Santa Claus government, where government has the power to take whatever percentage it wants, has out-of-control spending on welfare state programs, and of course the warfare state programs, because that's a big recipient of the Santa Claus largesse too. And you've got people honestly thinking that they're free too. And I think the Americans today exemplify my favorite quote, where Johann Goethe says, "None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free."
Well, there's another element in which our modern welfare national security state is like Santa Claus. He knows when you are sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, so for goodness sake. Because otherwise, the government surveillance agents will know you've been bad and they will add things to your body. So the government is like Santa that way too. He knows when you're sleeping and when you're awake.
Oh, that's fantastic. No, you are absolutely right. I mean, that's what the NSA is all about, is that we have to watch you. We have to monitor you. We have to have cameras everywhere. We have to look at your emails, because you might be bad. And if you might be bad, well, how are we going to withhold our goodies from you? And so, yeah, they really don't know when we've been naughty or nice and so forth because of the massive surveillance scheme that comes with this Santa Claus welfare warfare state society.
Yeah, but there is a silver lining to everything, Jacob. In a world in which democracy, bureaucracy seems like an impenetrable wall, the NSA is one government bureaucracy that does listen.
That's sick. That is really sick.
It's true.
But let me tell you what the big problem is here, Richard. The big problem we're really facing is that we all grow up under this system. In the 1930s, when Roosevelt enacted the New Deal, which was really this revolutionary change in America's economic system, that people understood that it was a change because they had lived under the opposite system all the way up to around the late 20s. Or even maybe before, but there were still people that understood what the remnants of a free society were all about. In the 1940s, when America's system was changed to a national security state, a type of governmental system that is inherent to totalitarian regimes, people still understood that something was different. I mean, Eisenhower even alluded to this in his farewell address, where he said, "This is a new system we have for America, necessitated by the Cold War, but we have to recognize it is a very potential danger to our democratic processes and liberties." The problem today is that everybody grows up with an NSA, a CIA, massive military industrial complex, massive welfare state, and it's ingrained in them from the first grade when they're in there saying the Pledge of Allegiance every day that this is freedom. This is a free society. And so when you grow up this way, and it's even worse for millennials when you stop to think about it, because they've grown up under this whole 9/11 war on terror syndrome. So, you say to a millennial, well, why don't we abolish the whole great big military industrial complex, the CIA and the NSA? And they're just shocked because they think that this is all part of their freedom and part of their safety and security. And so that's really where the big breakthrough that we have to achieve. And now, you and I grew up under a welfare state and a warfare state, but we did achieve a breakthrough. That's what distinguishes us as libertarians. And so for people to say, oh, you guys are pie in the sky, you can never convince people to move into your direction, is nonsense. Because if you and I could achieve a breakthrough, and if other libertarians can achieve a breakthrough, so can everyone else. But that's what I think is necessary, is to break through this mindset that the welfare, warfare, Santa Claus type of life is freedom, that it's good, that it's moral because you're forcing people to do the right thing, and get people to break out to a higher level and say, hey, this is what freedom is really all about. What is the role of government in a free society? Should it be engaged in mandatory charity? Should it be engaged in forcing people to be good and caring? Should it be the policeman of the world? And when people start asking those kind of questions, then I think that's when we're on our way back to a non-Santa Claus federal government.
The dilemma of the cultural generational taken for grantedness of these things. Santa's little helper who came by here earlier for a moment, my wife Anna, she also has been a professor. She taught history and political science, and she often says that she was teaching an American government class, and so at the beginning of the semester, she asked the students, "Well, what is the role? What is the purpose of government?" And students raised their hand, and with just being variations on what one student directly said, well, government, it's there to give out money. Now, you see, but that's the mindset that you were just saying, Jacob. When you've been brought up under a system in which it's taken for granted, government provides Social Security, student loans, public housing, welfare payments, medical attention and insurance, etc., etc., it is very difficult to break out this. A couple of weeks ago, you remember, I did my weekly piece on the FFF website on having had an audience with the tyrant of Yemen several years ago. And in the article, I point out that I meant young Yemeni businessmen in Yemen. some of whom had earned MBAs in the United States. But this is the society in which they came from. And they took for granted, for example, that even though they had been in the United States for 4 or 6 years, they came home and would then marry a woman they had never seen, but who had been arranged for them as a bride by their mother and their aunt, for instance, and the gentleman who was explaining this to me in his particular case. Or the idea that a system in which you cannot do anything in the society in terms of production, construction, business, without passing through a labyrinth of a bureaucracy and paying bribes to the appropriate person in the bureaucratic steps of the process at each stage to get permits. What public choice economists call rent seeking, that is the use of your political power to gain profits for yourself rather than through market transactions. And when you're born in that system, and it has affected your thinking practically like from birth, the same way we absorb how to speak a language or the norms and etiquettes of the polite behavior of the society in which we're born. These are the political attitudes, the cultural beliefs. And it is very difficult to break, but it is not impossible. Man is not merely some machine that a program has been punched in from which he cannot escape. It is a matter of us, as advocates of liberty, doing all that we can to devise ways to present the arguments for freedom in persuasive, cogent, timely, and relevant ways that makes the belief in freedom for ourselves and the rightness of freedom for others in a society of voluntary relationships and mutual agreements without force, coercion, or its threatened intimidation. That type of free society is both good, moral, and will provide far better what the government in its false promises says it will give to everyone.
Well, I'm a perfect example of the phenomenon you describe. I mean, I was in my mid-20s. I'd returned to my hometown of Laredo, Texas to practice law, and I was a liberal Democrat. I was campaigning for Democratic candidates, and I believed that the government had a role for helping people with the welfare state. In fact, it befuddled me, boggled my mind as to why conservatives would oppose helping the poor. I couldn't understand that kind of thinking. And so why shouldn't the government help the poor? Now, in my mind, the government had its own money. It never occurred to me that government was taking money from people and that was the only way that it would get its money. I looked at the government as just another entity in society. And so why shouldn't it be free to do what it wants with its money, and helping the poor would be a great example. Libertarianism, I broke through. I mean, because of libertarianism, and I discovered reality. Government gets its money by coercively taking it from people, which serves as a damper on economic prosperity. You're sucking capital, productive capital, out of people's pockets. And then there's the famous Frederick Bastiat concept: what is seen and what is not seen. That the government official, the Santa Claus, can say, look what we've done with your money. Well, no, look what we've done. We have brought jobs to your community. We have built that great big civic center in your community. Look, we are good. We're Santa Claus. Well, but as Bastiat said, he says, what's the unseen consequences of this? What about all the jobs that did not come into existence because you took people's money away from them? They were never able to invest in productive activity, a shoe industry or a automobile industry, because you sucked their money out of them to build that civic center or that bridge. And so you have consequences, unseen consequences, that we're not really taught to think about. But once you start thinking about that, you realize that this Santa Claus really operates with a dead hand. He confiscates all this money from the private sector. He ends up putting it into non-productive uses, which serves as a double dampening effect. That is, so that if you cancel the government programs and you cancel the taxation that funds it, all of a sudden the private sector is now filled with all this wealth that goes into productive activity, and it's a doubly positive effect.
See, the other thing is that since we're using this Santa Claus metaphor, is that, to whom does Santa Claus appeal? Little kids. Little kids are considered gullible, immature, not having developed logical faculties of cause and effect completely. And we often say, well, let the child remain naive and simple and believing in things. That Santa comes down the chimney. That at no cost to anyone else, he's made all these little toys with his elves up at the North Pole during the year so he can deliver them all to everyone miraculously around the globe on Christmas Eve, so it's there to open in the morning. Now, what is an adult? Johnny, I have to tell you, Santa doesn't exist. It's mom and dad who've been putting the presents under the tree. And mom and dad only can put presents under the tree to the extent that they have productively earned income that enables them to spend it on the things that you have told Santa you'd like to have when Christmas comes around. In other words, there's no free lunch. There's no free Christmas gifts. The adult realizes that it's a fairy tale. Maybe nice for little kids, but not what an adult believes in or takes for granted. That being an adult is that there's no presents under the tree, other than parents having earned income to be able to buy them based upon their productive efforts. Government has no money to give to Sam and Bob, Jane, and Jill, other than what it takes from others in society who have honestly and productively earned it, and now had to see it taken away without their voluntary consent, so government can play this imaginary and fictitious role.
Well, let me tell you what you've just done. Well, I mean, look, it's got to be devastating for a kid to learn the truth. At the moment he learns the truth, that it's the reality of it. Well, what you've just done is hit a bunch of adults with reality. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are going to look at this show that said, you mean the federal government really isn't Santa Claus?
Oh, no. The truth hurts.
Right.
You mean there's not a tooth fairy that put $1 under my pillow when my little tooth fell out?
Exactly. So yeah, you have just caused reality, a big strong dose of reality to all the adults that have not achieved a breakthrough that happen to come across this program.
You and I have been playing the Grinch.
All right. On that note, we got to wrap it up. So, Richard, greatly enjoyed the show. If you want to learn more about FFF, come to our website at fff.org. This is our end-of-year fundraising time. We depend on the support of people that really want to move America in a freer direction, a better direction, peaceful, prosperous, harmonious. And that means these principles that we're talking about here. And so we'd love your end-of-year support. If you've already given to us, great. If you haven't, there's still time to get a tax-deductible donation in. Just go to our website at fff.org. Subscribe to our FFF Daily also, which is free, where you get a free article by Richard every week, my daily blog, and many other good things that come from FFF, not from Santa Claus. Richard, greatly enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next time.